6 months earlier, Naomi had been working the overnight shift at Mercy General Hospital when they brought him in. The man with storm gray eyes and a bullet wound in his shoulder, who refused to give his real name, who paid in cash, and whose security detail filled the entire waiting room with an energy that made even the veteran nurses nervous. Naomi had seen plenty of gunshot wounds during her 7 years as an emergency room nurse. Domestic violence victims, gang members, accidental shootings, suicide attempts. She'd learned to treat the injury without asking too many questions about how it happened. But this man was different. He was beautiful in a dangerous way. Sharp jawline, dark hair swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from marble, and those eyes that seemed to see straight through her professional composure to the exhausted woman beneath. When she'd cut away his expensive shirt to access the wound, she'd seen the tattoos, intricate designs that marked him as someone deeply connected to a world she wanted nothing to do with. "You have steady hands," he'd said in that low voice with just a hint of an Italian accent that made her stomach flutter inappropriately. "You're not afraid." "I'm a professional," Naomi had replied, focusing on removing the bullet fragments. "Fear doesn't help anyone. Most people are afraid of me." It wasn't a boast, just a statement of fact. "Then maybe you're surrounding yourself with the wrong people." He'd laughed at that, a rich sound that seemed surprised from him. "What's your name, nurse?" "Naomi Sterling, and you are?" "Call me Dante." She'd known it wasn't his real name, or at least not his full name, but she'd accepted it, finished treating his wound, and sent him on his way with instructions for wound care and antibiotics that she suspected he'd never need. Men like him had private doctors for follow-up care. Naomi had thought about him more than she should have over the following weeks. Those gray eyes haunted her dreams, and she'd catch herself scanning the ER entrance, half hoping and half terrified that he might return. But months passed with no sign of him, and eventually she convinced herself that their encounter had been a one-time incident. A brief intersection of two completely different worlds that would never cross again. She was wrong. February in Chicago was brutal. The kind of cold that felt personal, that cut through even the thickest winter coat and settled into your bones. Naomi's shift had been particularly exhausting. 3 cardiac arrests, 2 DOAs, a domestic violence victim who'd barely survived, and a teenager with a drug overdose that had required every bit of her training and experience to stabilize. By the time her replacement arrived at 7 in the morning, Naomi was running on fumes. She'd been awake for 26 hours, having picked up a double shift to cover for a colleague whose daughter was sick. Her body ached, her feet felt like they were on fire, and all she wanted was to get home to her tiny apartment, take a hot shower, and sleep for the next 12 hours. The parking lot was nearly empty at that hour. Most of the day shift staff parked closer to the main entrance, leaving the back lot where Naomi had found a spot to her night shift Toyota Corolla and a handful of other vehicles. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that would have been beautiful if Naomi had the energy to appreciate it. She was halfway to her car when the pain hit. It started as pressure in her chest. Not sharp, not dramatic, just an uncomfortable tightness that made her pause and press her hand against her sternum. Indigestion, she thought. Too much vending machine coffee and not enough real food during her shift. She'd eat something when she got home. But then the pressure intensified, spreading across her chest like an iron band tightening around her ribs. Her left arm began to tingle, a numbness that spread from her shoulder to her fingertips. The parking lot tilted sideways, and Naomi realized with a clinical detachment that felt surreal that she was having a heart attack. She was 32 years old, in decent shape despite the stress of her job, with no family history of heart disease. This wasn't supposed to happen to her, but as her knees buckled and she felt herself falling toward the frozen asphalt, she understood that hearts didn't care about statistics or what was supposed to happen. The last thing she saw before her vision went black was a black SUV pulling into the parking lot, moving fast. Too fast for the conditions, and then nothing. Death wasn't what Naomi expected. There was no tunnel of light, no deceased relatives welcoming her to the afterlife, no sense of peace or acceptance. Instead, there was darkness and distance, and somewhere far away, a voice she recognized screaming her name with an intensity that made the darkness tremble. "Naomi, stay with me. Breathe, damn you." She tried to respond, tried to explain that she couldn't breathe because her heart had stopped, because her body had given up, because she was done. But the voice wouldn't accept that answer. "You're not leaving me. Do you hear me? You're not leaving me." Hands on her chest, pressing hard enough to crack ribs. Breath forced into her lungs. More compressions, more breaths. over and over with a desperation that felt almost violent in its intensity. She wanted to tell him to stop, to let her go, that it was easier this way. But something in that voice, something raw and terrified and absolutely refusing to give up, made her want to fight back toward it. When Naomi's heart finally stuttered back to life and her lungs dragged in their first painful breath, the first face she saw was Dante's. His hands were still on her chest, his expensive suit jacket discarded on the frozen ground beside them, his white dress shirt torn open at the collar. His face was a mask of controlled terror, and when her eyes opened and focused on him, something shifted in his expression that made her chest ache worse than the heart attack had. "You're alive," he breathed, and then louder, almost angry. "You're alive." "Dante?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "Saving your goddamn life." His hands were shaking as he checked her pulse, his professional composure shattered. "You were dead for 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Do you understand what that means?" Around them, she became aware of other people. Dante's security team creating a perimeter, someone calling for an ambulance, someone else bringing a blanket to cover her shivering body. But all she could focus on was Dante, still kneeling beside her on the frozen parking lot, his gray eyes filled with something that looked dangerously close to devastation. "I had a heart attack," she said stupidly, her brain struggling to catch up with what had just happened. "I know. I saw you collapse. I performed CPR." He said it like he was reporting facts, trying to distance himself from the emotion that was clearly overwhelming him. "The ambulance is coming. You're going to be fine." "How did you know CPR?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You think I don't know how to keep people alive? It's an essential skill in my line of work, even if usually I'm more concerned with the opposite outcome." The honesty should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel oddly safe. This dangerous man, this criminal who lived in a world of violence and moral ambiguity, had just saved her life with a desperation that suggested she meant more to him than a nurse he'd met once 6 months ago. "Why were you here?" she asked as the sound of sirens grew closer. Dante's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I've had someone watching over you since that night you treated me, making sure you stayed safe. That's stalking. That's protection." His hand moved to brush a strand of hair from her face, the gesture almost tender. "And it's a good thing I did, or you'd be dead right now." The ambulance arrived, and Naomi was loaded onto a gurney by paramedics who knew her by name and looked shaken to be treating one of their own. As they worked, checking her vitals and starting an IV, she kept her eyes on Dante, who stood just outside the ambulance doors, his expression unreadable. "Sir, you'll need to step back," one of the paramedics said. "I'm riding with her," Dante replied in a tone that left no room for argument. "Only family is allowed." Dante's security team shifted, and suddenly the young paramedic looked significantly less confident in his authority. "I'm riding with her," Dante repeated. "Don't make this difficult." Naomi should have protested, should have told them to keep this dangerous criminal away from her. Instead, she heard herself say, "It's fine, let him come." The ride to the hospital was a blur of medical terminology and procedures. Naomi drifted in and out of consciousness, her training making her acutely aware of how serious her condition was. Acute myocardial infarction, likely due to an undiagnosed congenital defect or sudden cardiac event. She needed cardiac catheterization, possibly surgery, definitely extended monitoring. Through it all, Dante sat beside her, his hand wrapped around hers with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about him. When they arrived at Mercy General, where her colleagues waited with expressions of shock and concern, he finally released her hand. "I'll be here when you wake up," he said, and it sounded like both a promise and a threat. The surgery was successful. The cardiac catheterization revealed a small congenital defect in one of Naomi's coronary arteries that had finally caused a complete blockage. They inserted a stent, corrected the defect, and assured her that with proper medication and lifestyle modifications, she should make a full recovery. But when Naomi woke up in the ICU 3 hours later, groggy and disoriented, the first thing she saw was Dante. He sat in the chair beside her bed, still in his dress pants and torn shirt, looking like he hadn't moved since they'd taken her into surgery. Behind him, she could see 2 of his security team standing guard outside her room, their presence making the ICU nurses visibly nervous. "You're awake," Dante said, setting aside the book he'd been reading. Medical textbook, she noticed. Cardiology. "How do you feel?" "Like I died and came back to life," Naomi replied, her throat raw from the breathing tube. Oh, wait, I did. 3 minutes and 14 seconds. His voice was tight. Your heart stopped for 3 minutes and 14 seconds. I've killed men who lived longer than that. The casual reference to murder should have terrified her. Instead, it made her angry. Is that supposed to be comforting? You saved my life, Dante. You don't get to be grim about it now. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. Most people are afraid to talk to me like that. I died today. I'm not afraid of much right now. She tried to sit up, grimacing at the pain in her chest. Besides, you've already seen me at my most vulnerable. Kind of hard to be intimidated after that. Dante stood and moved closer, his hand hovering near her shoulder, as if he wanted to help but wasn't sure if he should touch her. The doctors say you'll make a full recovery. The surgery went well. You'll need to take it easy for a few weeks, but you should be back to normal eventually. That's good. Naomi studied his face, seeing the exhaustion there, the strain that suggested he'd been genuinely worried. You didn't have to stay? Yes, I did. Why? The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them was quite ready to address. Dante's jaw worked, and for a long moment Naomi thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he sat on the edge of her bed, careful not to jostle any of the monitors or IV lines. Do you believe in fate, Naomi Sterling? I believe in probability and chance. I'm a nurse. I deal in science. Then consider the probability of what happened today. Consider the chances that I would be driving past this hospital, at this exact time, on a morning when I'm usually asleep after working through the night. Consider the odds that I would see you collapse from 50 yards away, that I would reach you in time, that I would remember enough of my medical training to keep you alive until help arrived. Naomi felt her heart rate pick up, setting off a small alarm on one of her monitors. What are you saying? I'm saying that you saved my life 6 months ago, and today I saved yours. I'm saying that you're the first person in 15 years who looked at me and saw a man instead of a monster. And I'm saying that having you die in my arms was the most terrifying experience of my entire life, which is saying something given what I do for a living. The raw honesty in his voice made her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with her heart attack. Dante, I don't even know your real name. I don't know anything about you except that you're involved in something illegal and dangerous, and you have the power to make hospital staff do whatever you want. Dante Rossi. He said it like he was offering her something precious. My name is Dante Rossi. I'm the head of the Rossi crime family, which operates primarily out of Chicago and New York. I inherited the position when my father died 8 years ago, and I've been trying to modernize our operations ever since with mixed success. I'm 38 years old, I have 3 sisters who live in Italy under protection, and until 6 months ago, I'd convinced myself that I was perfectly content with a life that revolved around business and violence and strategic partnerships. And now I can't stop thinking about a nurse with steady hands who treated my bullet wound without judgment and told me I was surrounding myself with the wrong people. Now I've spent 6 months having you followed, not because I'm a stalker, but because I needed to know you were safe. And now I've had to watch you die and bring you back to life, and I've realized that I'm not willing to let you go. The possessiveness in his voice should have sent her running. This was exactly the kind of dangerous, obsessive behavior that every instinct told her to avoid. Dante Rossi was a criminal, a killer, someone who operated in a world of violence and moral compromise. Getting involved with him would complicate her life in ways she couldn't even imagine. But he'd also saved her life. He'd refused to accept her death, had literally dragged her back from darkness with his bare hands and sheer force of will. And the way he was looking at her now, like she was something precious and irreplaceable, made her feel things she'd never experienced before. What exactly are you proposing? She asked carefully. I'm proposing that you let me take care of you during your recovery. You live alone, you have no family in Chicago, and based on what I know about your finances, you can't afford to take much time off work. Let me help. In exchange for what? A slight smile crossed his face. You've been around dangerous men long enough to ask the right questions. In exchange for nothing, Naomi. Or in exchange for everything, depending on how you look at it. I want you to give me a chance to prove that I'm not just the monster you think I am. I want you to let me show you the man I could be with you. That's insane? Probably. He stood, reaching into his pocket to pull out a business card with nothing but a phone number printed on it. Think about it. You'll be here for at least a few more days while they monitor your recovery. I'll have security outside your room to make sure you're safe. And when you're ready to be discharged, call me. whether it's to accept my offer or to tell me to leave you alone." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Naomi, you were right that night 6 months ago. I was surrounding myself with the wrong people. It's taken me this long to understand that the right person has been there all along." The next 3 days in the hospital were surreal. Naomi's colleagues visited in shifts, bringing flowers and concern and questions about the two large men in expensive suits who stood guard outside her room at all hours. She deflected as best she could, claiming they were friends of a friend, but the speculation was obvious. Her cardiologist, Dr. Chen, was pleased with her recovery. The stent was functioning perfectly, her heart rhythm had stabilized, and there was no indication of permanent damage. With proper medication management and some lifestyle changes, she should be able to return to full duty in about 6 weeks. But every night, after the doctors had made their final rounds and the hospital had settled into its overnight rhythm, Dante would appear. He never stayed long, just an hour or two, sitting in the chair beside her bed and talking. About his childhood in Sicily, about taking over the family business too young, about the constant pressure of managing an organization that operated in the shadows. "Do you ever regret it?" Naomi asked on the third night, when the morphine had loosened her tongue enough to ask the question that had been bothering her. "The life you lead." Dante considered the question seriously, his gray eyes thoughtful. "Regret implies I had a choice. My father groomed me for this position from the time I was 8 years old. By the time I was old enough to understand what I was being shaped into, it was too late to choose a different path." "That's a cop-out. You always have choices." "Do I? What do you think would happen if I simply walked away from the family business? How many people would die in the power vacuum that followed? How many legitimate operations would be taken over by people far worse than me? I've spent 8 years trying to transition our family toward legal enterprises, trying to reduce the violence, trying to protect the communities we operate in rather than exploit them. That's not redemption, but it's something." Naomi studied his face, seeing the exhaustion there, the burden he carried. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "A monster. Someone who enjoyed the violence, who felt nothing for the people he hurt. But you're just a man trying to survive in an impossible situation, aren't you?" "Don't romanticize me, Naomi. I've killed people. I've ordered deaths. I've done things that would horrify you if you knew the details. The fact that I regret some of those actions doesn't make them any less terrible." "I know." She reached out and took his hand, surprising them both. "But I also know that you saved my life, that you spent 3 nights sitting beside my hospital bed when you could be anywhere else, that you're trying to be better than what you were raised to be. That has to count for something." Dante's hand tightened on hers, and something shifted in his expression. "You make me want to be better. You make me think that maybe redemption is possible after all." On the morning of her discharge, Naomi woke to find a duffel bag sitting beside her bed, along with a note in elegant handwriting. "Comfortable clothes for the ride home. Car will be waiting at 10. D." Inside the bag were soft sweatpants, a cashmere hoodie that probably cost more than her monthly rent, warm socks, and a winter coat lined with fur. Everything was in her size, everything was exactly what she would have chosen for herself if she'd had the money and the time to shop. The level of attention to detail should have been creepy, but instead it felt caring. Like someone had actually paid attention to who she was and what she needed. Dr. Chen cleared her for discharge with the usual warnings about taking it easy, following up with cardiology, taking her medications religiously. Naomi nodded through the instructions, her mind already racing ahead to what came next. She still hadn't decided whether to call Dante or to simply go home to her empty apartment and try to return to her normal life. But when she was finally dressed and ready to leave, when the nurse brought the mandatory wheelchair to escort her out, Naomi found herself pulling out the business card Dante had left. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number. He answered on the first ring. "Naomi, I'm being discharged. They're taking me down now." A pause, weighted with significance. Should I have my car waiting? This was it. The moment where she chose safety and solitude or danger and possibility. The smart choice was obvious. Go home, recover alone, avoid the complications that came with getting involved with a man like Dante Rossi. Keep her life simple and safe and uncomplicated, but simple and safe hadn't saved her life in that parking lot. Dante had. And maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be a little reckless. "Yes," she said quietly, "your car should be waiting." The black SUV was parked at the main entrance when they brought her down, and Dante was standing beside it looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine shoot in a charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and dangerous beauty. He opened the back door as they approached, then dismissed the nurse with a look that had her scurrying back inside without argument. "You came," Dante said, and there was something vulnerable in his voice that made Naomi's breath catch. "You saved my life. The least I can do is give you a chance to explain why I shouldn't be terrified of you." He helped her into the SUV with surprising gentleness, his hand steady on her elbow as she settled into the leather seat. Once he was beside her and they were moving through Chicago traffic, he reached into the seat pocket and pulled out a folder. "What's this?" Naomi asked. "Information. Everything you need to know about who I am and what I do. Financial records, details of our operations, names of my associates, locations of our legitimate and illegitimate businesses. Everything that could be used to destroy me and my entire organization." Naomi stared at the folder like it was a poisonous snake. "Why would you give me this?" "Because I want you to make an informed decision. You deserve to know exactly who you're getting involved with, what the risks are, what you'd be walking into. If you choose to walk away after reading this, I'll respect that decision, but you won't be making that choice based on ignorance or fear." She opened the folder with shaking hands and began to read. The contents were damning and surprisingly mundane all at once. Yes, the Rossi family still had connections to traditional organized crime, loan sharking, money laundering, protection rackets. But there were also legitimate businesses, restaurants and clubs and real estate developments. There were charitable donations to community organizations, scholarships for disadvantaged youth, programs to help people escape gang violence. It wasn't redemption, but it was something, an attempt to build something positive alongside the necessary darkness. "You really are trying to change things, aren't you?" she said after several minutes of reading. "One decision at a time. It's not fast, and it's not easy, but it's something." He watched her face carefully. "The question is whether you can accept that. Whether you can be with someone whose hands are stained with blood, even if he's trying to wash them clean." They arrived at a building in the Gold Coast, one of Chicago's most exclusive neighborhoods. Naomi blinked in confusion as Dante helped her out of the SUV. "This isn't my apartment." "No, it's mine. Your apartment is a fourth-floor walk-up with no elevator, no security, and winters that drop below freezing because your landlord doesn't properly maintain the heating system. You're recovering from a major cardiac event. You need somewhere safe and comfortable to heal." Naomi should have argued, should have insisted on going to her own place, maintaining her independence. But the truth was, the thought of climbing 4 flights of stairs right now made her exhausted, and the idea of being alone in her cramped studio apartment, worrying about her health and her finances and how she was going to manage the next few weeks, was overwhelming. "Just until I'm cleared to return to work," she heard herself say. "And I'm sleeping in the guest room." Dante's smile was slow and devastating. "For now." His penthouse was exactly what she expected. Sleek, modern design, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furnishings that probably cost more than her annual salary. But there were also unexpected touches. Books everywhere, covering every available surface. Art on the walls that leaned toward the abstract and emotional rather than the expensive and pretentious. A kitchen that was clearly actually used, not just for show. "The guest room is down this hall," Dante said, leading her past the main living area. "It has its own bathroom, and I've had some clothes brought in that should fit you. If you need anything, medical supplies, food, entertainment, just let me know or tell Maria." "Maria?" "My housekeeper. She comes in daily and is probably the only person in my life who isn't afraid of me." He pushed open a door to reveal a room that was larger than her entire apartment, with a king-size bed that looked like a cloud and French doors leading to a private terrace. "Get some rest. Doctor's orders." Naomi turned to face him, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened. 3 days ago, she died in a parking lot. Now she was standing in a multi-million-dollar penthouse belonging to a Mafia boss who looked at her like she was something precious and irreplaceable. Her life had become completely surreal. "Dante, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be around someone like you. I'm a nurse from the South Side who works double shifts to make rent. You're this." She gestured helplessly at the luxury surrounding them. He stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her face with surprising tenderness. "You're the woman who saved my life without judgment. You're the woman who died in my arms and fought her way back because I asked her to. You're the woman who makes me believe I could be better than what I am. That's everything that matters, Naomi. The rest is just details." When he kissed her, it was gentle, almost chaste. a promise rather than a claim. And when he pulled back, his gray eyes were filled with something that looked dangerously like hope. "Rest," he said again. "We have time to figure everything else out." The next 2 weeks passed in a strange domesticity that Naomi had never experienced before. Dante worked from home more often than not, taking calls in his study while she recovered in the guest room or on the terrace when the weather permitted. Maria, the housekeeper, turned out to be a warm Italian woman in her 60s who clucked over Naomi's health and made sure she took her medications on time and ate proper meals. Dr. Chen's follow-up appointments confirmed that Naomi's recovery was progressing well. Her heart function was returning to normal, her energy levels were improving, and she was cleared to start light activity. But every time she mentioned returning to her own apartment, Dante would find a reason why she should stay just a little longer. "Your building still hasn't fixed the heating. You're not cleared for climbing stairs yet. One more week won't hurt, and Maria enjoys having someone to fuss over." The truth was, Naomi wasn't ready to leave. Despite everything logical telling her this was a terrible idea, she'd never felt safer or more cared for than she did in Dante's home. He was attentive without being suffocating, present without being intrusive. He seemed to understand when she needed company and when she needed solitude, when she wanted to talk and when she just wanted to sit in comfortable silence. But there was also tension building between them. The kind of awareness that made every accidental touch feel electric, every shared look feel heavy with meaning. They were dancing around something inevitable, and both of them knew it. The breaking point came 3 weeks after her discharge. Naomi had been cleared for normal activity, including work, though her supervisor had insisted she take 1 more week before returning to her shifts. She was feeling restless, physically healthy, but emotionally confused about where things stood with Dante. They were having dinner together, a habit that had developed over the weeks of her recovery. Maria had made ossobuco, and they were eating at the dining table rather than the more casual kitchen island. Dante was telling her about a business deal, carefully edited to remove the criminal elements, when Naomi finally interrupted. "We need to talk about what happens next." Dante set down his wine glass, his expression becoming carefully neutral. "All right. I'm cleared to go back to work. My apartment's heating has been fixed. I'm recovered enough to manage on my own, which means I need to decide whether I'm going home or whether I'm staying here. And if I'm staying, we need to define what that means." "What do you want it to mean?" I want to understand what this is between us. You saved my life. You've taken care of me for 3 weeks. You kiss me like I'm precious, but you still sleep in your own room every night. You tell me about your business but edit out the dangerous parts. You treat me like I'm important to you, but you won't tell me how important." Dante leaned back in his chair, studying her with those gray eyes that saw too much. "I'm trying to give you space to make your own choices without feeling pressured by me. I'm trying to be better than the possessive bastard I actually am. What if I don't want space? What if I want to know what you're really thinking?" "You want to know what I'm thinking?" He stood abruptly, moving around the table to pull her to her feet. "I'm thinking that I've been sleeping 3 rooms away from you for 3 weeks, and every night I lie awake knowing you're so close, but not mine yet. I'm thinking that watching you die was the worst moment of my life, and having you back in my arms alive was the best. I'm thinking that I've spent 38 years convinced I didn't deserve love or softness or anything good, and then you walked into my life with your steady hands and your kind eyes, and suddenly I want everything." Naomi's heart was racing again, but this time it had nothing to do with cardiac dysfunction. "Dante, I'm thinking," he continued, his voice rough with suppressed emotion, "that I want you to stay. Not as a guest, not as someone I'm protecting out of obligation, but as mine. In my home, in my life, in my bed. I want to wake up next to you every morning and know that you're safe and cared for and loved. I want to give you everything you've never had and protect you from everything that could hurt you. And I'm terrified that wanting those things makes me exactly the kind of possessive monster you should run from. What if I don't want to run?" His hands framed her face, and the intensity in his eyes made her breathless. "Then say it. Tell me you want this, that you want me, despite everything you know about who I am and what I do." Naomi thought about all the logical reasons to walk away. The danger, the moral complications, the absolute certainty that getting involved with Dante Rossi would change her life in ways she couldn't fully predict. But she also thought about how safe she felt with him, how cared for, how alive. She thought about the man who'd refused to let her die, who dragged her back from darkness with nothing but desperation and will and love. "I want this," she said clearly. "I want you, all of it, the good and the bad and the complicated. I want to try." The kiss was nothing like the gentle ones they'd shared before. This was hunger and need and 3 weeks of suppressed desire finally unleashed. Dante's hands were in her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss, and Naomi pressed closer, desperate to eliminate any space between them. "Are you sure?" he asked against her lips, even as his hands roamed her back. "Once we do this, I won't let you go easily. I'm not good at casual, Naomi. When I commit to something, I commit completely." "I don't want casual. I want you." She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "But I need you to promise me something." "Anything. Promise me you won't treat me like I'm fragile. I had a heart attack. I'm recovered. And I'm tired of everyone, including you, acting like I might break at any moment. If we're doing this, I need you to see me as strong enough to handle your world." Something fierce and approving flashed in his eyes. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. The fact that you're even considering being with me proves that. But I can't promise not to be protective. It's who I am, especially with people I love." "You love me?" "Naomi, I've loved you since you told me I was surrounding myself with the wrong people. I've loved you through 6 months of watching you from a distance. I've loved you through 3 minutes of hell when your heart stopped and I thought I'd lost you forever. The question has never been whether I love you. It's been whether you could love me back." Naomi felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I think I started loving you when you refused to let me die, when you brought me back screaming that I wasn't leaving you. That kind of desperation, that kind of refusal to accept loss, it changed something in me. So you'll stay? Really stay? Not as a guest, but as mine?" "I'll stay, on one condition." Dante tensed slightly. "What condition?" "You start showing me the real parts of your life. Not the edited version you think I can handle, but the actual truth. If I'm going to be with you, I need to understand your world, even the dark parts. I need to see what I'm committing to." He studied her face for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "All right, but don't say I didn't warn you when you see things that frighten you." "I've been frightened before. I survived it. We'll survive this too." The next few months were an education in duality. During the day, Naomi returned to work at Mercy General, falling back into the familiar rhythms of nursing. Her colleagues noticed the change in her, the expensive clothes she sometimes wore, the black SUV that occasionally dropped her off or picked her up, the way she carried herself with more confidence. But she kept her personal life private, deflecting questions with practiced ease. At night, she returned to Dante's penthouse, which had become their home. He kept his promise about showing her the reality of his life. She sat in on business meetings, watching him negotiate with dangerous men who showed him deference mixed with fear. She learned the names and faces of his associates, the legitimate businessmen and the enforcers, the accountants who managed money laundering, and the lawyers who kept everyone out of prison. It was terrifying and fascinating in equal measure. Dante ran his organization with the same precision and strategic thinking that a corporate CEO might use, but the stakes were higher and the consequences more permanent. She saw him order violence with a coldness that should have sent her running, but she also saw the context, the necessity of maintaining control in a world where showing weakness meant death. "Does it bother you?" Dante asked one night, after a particularly tense meeting where he'd ordered retaliation against a rival family who'd attacked one of their operations. Naomi considered the question honestly. "Yes, but not in the way you think. It bothers me that this is necessary, that you live in a world where violence is the only language some people understand. But it doesn't bother me that you're the one making these decisions, because I've seen what happens when weaker, crueler people hold power. You're trying to minimize harm. That has to count for something. You're making excuses for me." "No, I'm understanding context. There's a difference." She moved to sit beside him on the couch, taking his hand. "I'm not naive, Dante. I know you've done terrible things, but I also know you've prevented worse things from happening. That's the moral calculus of your world, and while it's not black and white, it's not all darkness either." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "Sometimes I think you see me more clearly than I see myself. That's what love does. It shows you the truth of who someone is, not who they pretend to be." 6 months after Naomi's heart attack, Dante took her to Italy to meet his sisters. The trip was equal parts vacation and business, with Dante attending meetings with Italian associates, while Naomi explored Florence and Venice under the watchful eye of security teams. His sisters, Alessia, Francesca, and Giuliana, were warm and welcoming, curious about the American nurse who'd captured their notoriously solitary brother's heart. They spoke rapidly in Italian, occasionally translating for Naomi's benefit, and made her feel like part of the family in a way she'd never experienced before. "He's different with you," Alicia, the eldest, told Naomi during a private moment while the men were discussing business. "Softer. More like the brother we remember from before our father died." "He saved my life," Naomi said simply. "That tends to create a bond." "It's more than that. He looks at you like you're his reason for breathing, like you make him want to be better than what he is. That's rare for men like our brother." The conversation stayed with Naomi long after they returned to Chicago. She thought about what Dante had said that first night, about how she made him want to be better. And she thought about her own life, how saving people and healing them had always been her purpose. But with Dante, it felt like something more. Not fixing him or changing him, but loving him enough that he wanted to change himself. A year after her heart attack, almost to the day, Naomi was working a rare day shift when they brought in a gunshot victim who looked hauntingly familiar. One of Dante's men wounded in a confrontation with a rival family. The bullet had nicked his femoral artery, and he was bleeding out fast. Naomi's training kicked in immediately. She stabilized the man, got him into surgery, and saved his life with the same professional competence she brought to every patient. But afterward, when the adrenaline faded and she was alone in the break room, the reality of what had just happened hit her. This was Dante's world. These were the stakes he lived with every day. And by loving him, by choosing to be with him, she'd become part of it. She was still sitting there, hands shaking slightly around her coffee cup, when Dante appeared in the doorway. He must have come as soon as he heard what happened, still in his business suit, his face drawn with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, closing the door behind him to give them privacy. "I just saved the life of one of your men. A man who was shot because of his association with you, in a conflict I don't fully understand, for reasons that have to do with territory and respect and all the things that make your world so dangerous." She looked up at him, seeing her fear reflected in his eyes. "This is what our life is going to be like, isn't it? This constant awareness that the people you care about are targets." Dante crossed the room and knelt in front of her, taking her trembling hands in his steady ones. "Yes, and I understand if that's too much for you. If you want to walk away, if this is the reality check you needed to realize you can't do this, I'll let you go. It'll destroy me, but I'll let you go if that's what's best for you." Naomi studied his face, seeing the genuine willingness to sacrifice his own happiness for her safety and peace of mind. It would have been so easy to walk away, to choose the simpler path, to return to her uncomplicated life before Dante Rossi had saved her in that parking lot. But the truth was, she didn't want simple anymore. She wanted this beautiful, dangerous, impossible love. "I'm not walking away," she said firmly, "but I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll do everything in your power to keep yourself and your people safe. Promise me you'll keep working toward legitimate operations and away from violence. Promise me that when we have children someday, they'll inherit a legacy that's about building things, not destroying them. Can you promise me that?" Dante's eyes widened slightly at the mention of children, but then something soft and hopeful crossed his face. "I promise. I'm already working on it, but I promise I'll accelerate the transition. For you, for our future. Then I'm staying. For better or worse, for heart attacks and gunshot wounds, for penthouse apartments and hospital breaks rooms, I'm staying." When he kissed her this time, it tasted like promises and hope and forever. 3 years after her heart attack, Naomi stood in the guest bathroom of their penthouse, staring at a positive pregnancy test with shaking hands. They'd talked about children, had agreed they wanted them eventually, but this was suddenly, beautifully, terrifyingly real. She found Dante in his study, reviewing financial reports from one of their legitimate restaurant chains. The word "there" had become natural over the past few years. Naomi had become deeply involved in the charitable side of Dante's operations, using her medical background to establish healthcare clinics in underserved neighborhoods, funded by Rossi family money being laundered into legitimate good works. "We need to talk," she said from the doorway. Dante looked up, immediately setting aside his work when he saw her expression. "What's wrong? Is it your heart?" "No, my heart is fine. Perfect, actually." She moved into the room, the pregnancy test clutched in her hand. "I'm pregnant." The silence stretched between them, and for a moment Naomi worried she'd miscalculated his reaction. But then Dante was across the room, pulling her into his arms with a gentleness that belied his strength. "A baby," he breathed against her hair. "We're having a baby. Are you happy?" "I know we talked about it, but this is sooner than we planned. And with everything going on with the business transition, if the timing is bad. He pulled back far enough to cup her face, and his gray eyes were bright with unshed tears. The timing is perfect. Everything is perfect. You're perfect. And we're going to have a child who'll grow up knowing they're loved and protected, and that their father spent every day trying to be worthy of their mother. Naomi felt her own tears fall, happy tears that had become more common since she'd let herself love this impossible, wonderful man. I'm scared. So am I. But we'll figure it out together, just like we've figured out everything else. The pregnancy was healthy and uncomplicated, monitored closely by the best cardiologists and obstetricians in Chicago. Dante was predictably overprotective, hovering and worrying, and driving Naomi slightly crazy with his concern. But underneath the anxiety, she could see his excitement, the way he read every parenting book he could find, the way he insisted on turning the second guest room into a nursery that rivaled anything in a magazine. 7 months into her pregnancy, Naomi got a call from Dr. Chen asking her to come in for an unscheduled appointment. The edge of concern in his voice made her heart race, and she called Dante immediately. I'm sure it's nothing, he said, but she could hear the worry underneath his calm tone. I'm 10 minutes away. Don't go in without me. They sat together in Dr. Chen's office, holding hands while he reviewed the latest test results. Your echocardiogram shows some concerning changes, he said carefully. The pregnancy is putting stress on your repaired coronary artery. Nothing critical yet, but we'll need to monitor you very closely for the remainder of your pregnancy. What does that mean? Dante asked, his hand tightening on Naomi's. It means we'll see you weekly for monitoring. Any symptoms, chest pain, unusual fatigue, shortness of breath beyond normal pregnancy, you come in, immediately. And we'll need to plan for a carefully controlled delivery, probably inducing labor a week or two early to minimize cardiac stress. Naomi felt her fear rising, but she forced it down. What are the risks? Dr. Chen hesitated, and that moment of silence told her everything she needed to know. There's a risk of cardiac event during delivery. We'll have a full team standing by, cardiology, cardiac surgery if needed. But I won't lie to you, Naomi. This is going to be carefully managed, and you need to take it very seriously. The drive home was silent. Naomi stared out the window, processing the information, while Dante drove with uncharacteristic caution. When they arrived back at the penthouse, he helped her out of the SUV with a gentleness that made her chest ache. Talk to me, he said once they were inside. Tell me what you're thinking. I'm thinking that I almost died 3 years ago, and now there's a chance I could die giving birth to our child. I'm thinking that this isn't fair to you or to our baby. I'm thinking that maybe I should have stayed away from you, like every logical part of me said to do. Dante turned her to face him, his expression fierce. Don't you dare regret us. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. You survived once before because I refused to let you go. If I have to drag you back from death again, I will. You're not leaving me, Naomi. Not now, not ever. Do you understand? The intensity in his voice, the absolute refusal to accept any outcome except her survival, reminded her of that moment in the parking lot 3 years ago, when her heart had stopped and Dante had brought her back through sheer force of will and desperate love. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. Terrified. But fear doesn't change anything. We're having this baby, and you're going to survive, and we're going to have the life we planned, because the alternative is unacceptable. The final weeks of pregnancy were tense. Naomi was on modified bed rest, working from home on the clinic projects, but forbidden from the physical demands of nursing. Dante barely left her side, conducting business from home and hovering with a protectiveness that would have been annoying if it wasn't so clearly born from love. 2 weeks before her due date, Naomi woke to cramping and the telltale signs of early labor. By the time they reached the hospital, her contractions were regular, and the cardiac monitors showed concerning changes in her heart rhythm. Dr. Chen and the cardiac team were waiting, everything prepared for the carefully orchestrated delivery. As they prepped her for the epidural and started monitoring every possible vital sign, Naomi found herself gripping Dante's hand with white-knuckled intensity. I'm here, he murmured, his free hand stroking her hair. I'm not going anywhere. You're going to be fine. You're going to meet our daughter and be fine. Daughter? They'd found out weeks ago, a girl who would have her mother's determination and her father's intensity, a girl who was about to be born into a world of complicated love and fierce protection. The labor progressed quickly, perhaps too quickly. Naomi could see the concerned looks passing between the medical team, could hear the machines registering changes in her cardiac function that her training told her were serious. And then suddenly the pain shifted from manageable to excruciating, and her vision started to gray at the edges. Her blood pressure is dropping, someone said urgently. Cardiac arrhythmia, she's going into V-fib. Naomi, stay with us. But she was slipping away again, just like 3 years ago in the parking lot. The darkness was pulling at her, promising rest, promising an end to the pain and fear. It would be so easy to just let go, to stop fighting. And then she heard Dante's voice cutting through the darkness with the same desperate intensity that had brought her back before. You're not leaving me. Do you hear me, Naomi? You're not leaving me or our daughter. Fight, damn you. Fight. The words were an anchor, pulling her back from the darkness. She felt the shock of the defibrillator, heard the frantic activity of the medical team, felt hands on her body working to keep her alive. But most of all, she felt Dante's presence, his absolute refusal to accept her death, his love that wouldn't let her go. Her heart stuttered back into rhythm. The monitor stabilized, and somewhere through the chaos, she heard the cry of a newborn baby. It's a girl, someone said. A healthy girl. Naomi's eyes fluttered open to see Dante's face above her, streaked with tears, his gray eyes wild with relief and fear and overwhelming love. You did it, he breathed. You're both alive. You're both alive. They placed the baby on Naomi's chest, a tiny perfect creature with a shock of dark hair and her father's stormy eyes. Naomi felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at their daughter, this miracle they'd created together, this perfect blend of the best parts of both of them. She's beautiful, Naomi whispered, her voice hoarse from the ordeal. She's perfect. You're perfect. Dante pressed his forehead to hers, his hand resting gently on the baby's back. You scared me again. That's twice now you've almost left me. You brought me back again. That's twice now you've saved my life. I'll keep saving you for as long as we both live. However many times it takes, however hard I have to fight, I'll never let you go. The recovery was easier this time, perhaps because Naomi's heart was stronger from 3 years of careful management, or perhaps because she had more to live for now. She named their daughter Sophia, after Dante's mother, and watched as this dangerous man transformed into the gentlest, most devoted father she could imagine. 2 years later, standing in their penthouse watching Dante play with Sophia on the floor, Naomi reflected on the impossible journey that had brought her here. She'd died twice and been brought back both times by this man's refusal to accept her death. She'd fallen in love with someone who should have been all wrong for her, but who turned out to be absolutely right. Their life wasn't conventional. Dante still ran the family organization, though it was increasingly legitimate with each passing year. There were still dangers, still complications, still moments when Naomi had to confront the moral ambiguity of loving someone who lived in shades of gray rather than black and white. But there was also this, a family, a home, a man who loved her with an intensity that had literally defied death, and a daughter who would grow up knowing that love, real love, meant fighting for each other no matter what obstacles stood in the way. What are you thinking about? Dante asked, looking up from where he was building blocks with Sophia. How lucky I am. How grateful I am that you happened to be driving past that hospital on the morning my heart stopped. How our entire life together has been built on the foundation of you refusing to let me go. He stood, crossing to where she stood by the window, and pulled her into his arms. Sophia toddled over to grab both their legs, making them laugh. I'll never let you go, Dante said softly. That's the promise I made when I brought you back the first time, and it's a promise I'll keep forever. You're not leaving me, Naomi Rossi. Not ever. And as she stood there, wrapped in the arms of the man who'd saved her life twice, surrounded by the family they'd built together, Naomi knew he was right. They'd found each other across impossible circumstances, had survived death and danger and every logical reason they shouldn't work. But love, the kind of love that refuses to give up, that fights back from darkness, that transforms dangerous men and saves dying women, that kind of love was stronger than anything that could stand in its way. That's the story of Naomi Sterling, the nurse who died in a hospital parking lot and was brought back to life by an Italian Mafia boss who screamed, "You're not leaving me," and meant it with every fiber of his being. Her story proves that sometimes the most dangerous choice leads to the safest love, that second chances are real, and that the person who saves your life might just be the person meant to share it with you forever. If this story moved you and you want to hear more incredible tales of unexpected protection, dangerous romance, and love that conquers all obstacles, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We share new stories every week about real people who discovered that heroes come in all forms, and that sometimes the most meaningful relationships begin with the most dramatic moments. What did you think of Naomi and Dante's story? Have you ever been in a situation where a stranger became your savior? Would you have accepted Dante's protection? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing how these stories resonate with your own experiences of unexpected kindness, protection, and love that defies all logic. Remember, sometimes the person who saves you is someone you never expected to trust. And sometimes the most dangerous choice leads to the safest love. Sometimes when your heart stops beating, the right person can bring you back by sheer force of will and whisper words that become your forever. You're not leaving me.